My two kids, Sam and Robbie, are twins. They're 6 years old. About a year ago, we were still living in our old house, but something happened that forced us to move. It's a long, awful story that I'd lived in that old house for 4 years. My wife Carol and I got married while I was there, and we had the twins there too. The neighborhood had been slowly going downhill, but even so, we originally planned to stay for the long haul, until this all went down. We were a corner lot, and the house directly behind us on the cross street was hidden by a bunch of tall trees and thick bushes, so we almost never saw those neighbors. Our neighbor to the right, though, his name was Steve. He'd only moved in less than a year earlier. At that point, I'd only talked to him a couple of times, and both times I could barely understand him because of his thick accent. He just didn't come off as the friendliest guy. Two of his windows overlooked our backyard. There wasn't a ton of privacy because of that, but whatever rooms those windows belonged to, I never saw the lights on in either one, so I always figured they were in used guest rooms or storage or something like that. One day in the summer, Sam and Robbie were out back playing in their inflatable pool and shooting each other with water guns while I was doing yard work. At one point I was walking toward the detached garage and caught a glimpse of Steve at his window, just for half a second, before he turned and disappeared from view. It was a little strange, sure, but I brushed it off. Later that same day, as the sun was setting, the kids went back outside to play again. It had been a scorching day, so they hopped right back into the pool. Carol and I were in the kitchen while she was getting dinner ready. Then the kids' laughter just stopped for a while. Suddenly Robbie came running inside and said there was a flashing light coming from the neighbor's window, that I followed him out to the backyard so he could show me. He pointed up at one of Steve's upstairs windows that overlooked our yard and said there was a white light that kept flashing from it. I immediately jumped to the worst-case scenario and asked the twins if it looked like a camera flash. They both nodded yes. That I told them it was time to dry off and come inside. I helped them towel off, brought them in, and went straight to tell Carol. She had the exact same gut reaction I did. She said I should go next door and knock on Steve's door. So I did, but he never answered. His car was sitting in the driveway, so he had to be home. After knocking a few times and ringing the bell, I gave up and went back home. That I told Carol he wasn't answering, which only made what the kids described seem more believable. We couldn't prove the white light they saw was a camera flash, but it sure sounded like one, and it was seriously disturbing. Some time passed, maybe even a few weeks, before the next thing happened. One night Carol and I were in the bedroom when we heard our side gate being quietly opened and then closed. Carol wanted me to go check it out, so I stepped into the backyard and looked around with all the lights on. I didn't find anyone or anything, but I noticed the lights were on in Steve's backyard. I walked over and peered over the fence, and nearly jumped out of my skin when he suddenly appeared on the other side and asked if I needed something. That I asked if he'd seen or heard anyone sneaking through our yard. He said no. I took the opportunity to ask him straight up if he'd been watching my kids, because they thought someone at his window had been taking pictures of them in the pool. His reaction was off. He got overly defensive, almost yelling at me for even suggesting it. Without any real proof, I didn't want to start a feud with a neighbor, so I apologized and went back inside. Carol wasn't happy. She said he was full of it. The next incident didn't happen until a few more weeks later. This time it was the middle of the night while we were asleep. I woke up to Carol shaking me in a panic. I was disoriented at first, but then I heard the kids screaming from their room. I shot out of bed and ran downstairs. Robbie was awake and crying, and a few seconds later I realized his crying had woken up Sammy, who was now screaming too. Robbie said someone had been outside their window just a second ago, and there was a camera flash. That I got chills, but I also felt rage building. All I could manage was, what did he look like? He said he didn't see. I brought both kids up to our bed to sleep with us. With the lights off, I peeked out our bedroom window towards Steve's dark house next door. I scanned every window, and there he was. Just like me, peeking out from one of the upstairs windows in the same room that overlooks our backyard. That I stormed outside, went next door, and rang his doorbell probably 15 times. He never answered. I called the police right then just to file a report on him, so if anyone else ever reported something similar, maybe the department would actually look into him. After that, I never saw him again. Sometimes I'd sit out front hoping to catch him coming or going, but he clearly made a point of avoiding being outside whenever I was around. Because of all this, we ended up moving within a month to a new house in a nearby town. It's turned out to be a much better place to raise the kids. Anyway. I live in a pretty typical suburban town on Long Island, New York. My girlfriend Sarah and I recently started renting a small house, perfect size for 2, maybe 4 down the line. We've got a decent-sized backyard, and our place sits on a really quiet street. One side of the house borders what the county calls a water drainage basin, just a bunch of trees around a sump. On the other side is our neighbor Kyle, who lives with his wife. They're in their 60s, a bit older, and keep to themselves. Directly across the street is a small patch of woods in front of another drainage basin. So for anyone who values privacy out front, our house is pretty ideal. But then there's the backyard. Kyle's place is blocked by some bushes the landlord planted years ago, so besides the one house directly behind us over the fence, no other homes can see into our yard. That single house looking right into our backyard has been enough to make Sarah and me genuinely uncomfortable. Yes, I'm writing this, it's fall, so we've been doing cleanup in the front and back the past few weeks. I started noticing that whenever we were out there, these 2 people would be standing at the upstairs window of the house behind us, a middle-aged man and woman. Whenever I'd glance up, they'd just keep staring, watching me. It got really uncomfortable. We tried pretending not to notice, but we could only handle that for so long. The leaves kept dropping day after day, and the cleanup had to keep going. Sarah didn't even want to be in the yard anymore because those 2 watching us from the window without fail was creeping her out so much. So one foggy day while I was raking, I looked up at the window, and there they were again, standing at that big rectangular pane. I decided to wave at them, see if they'd wave back. After a few seconds of smiling and waving, they didn't move. No reaction at all. But I could feel their stares, and I could see their eyes locked on me. I turned away and tried to keep raking, but after sneaking another look a couple minutes later and seeing them still there, I felt too awkward and weird to stay out. I went inside. Sarah said we should go over and introduce ourselves. At first I wasn't keen on the idea, but she talked me into it. We walked around the block to that house and rang the bell. We figured one of the people from the window would answer, but instead the door cracked open, just enough to show half a person's head. It didn't look like either of the 2 we'd seen upstairs. The house was so dark inside it looked downright ominous and uncanny, just staring at half that face. The guy looked a lot younger, like in his 20s. Sarah and I tried to be friendly and introduced ourselves. He seemed really closed off, not interested in talking at all. He had this "what do you want" attitude. When I asked if he lived with anyone else, like maybe his parents, he said no. I mentioned the man and woman who were always at the upstairs window, and the guy on the other side of the door said he had no idea who I was talking about. Sarah and I felt really unsettled, so we just left. But weirdly, as we walked down the path back to the sidewalk, I noticed the guy was still peeking half his face through the cracked door. I'm pretty sure he watched us the whole way until we were out of sight. That whole interaction was weirder and creepier than we'd expected. When we got home, I went upstairs to our bedroom. Our upstairs is just the master bedroom and bathroom, and one of the windows looks right over to that house behind the fence. I looked out, and there those 2 people were again, staring out their window. Even from this distance, it felt like they were looking straight at me. I shut the blinds and went downstairs to tell Sarah. We agreed it was time to plant some arborvitae to block their view. The only problem is it's already fall, way too late to plant trees. We're stuck making it through the winter. After a few days of avoiding looking out the bedroom window or going into the backyard, one night we heard this strange knocking sound from downstairs. I told Sarah to stay in bed while I went to check. The knocking got louder, and I quickly realized it wasn't someone at the door. It was coming from the glass of one of the backyard windows. The blinds were closed, of course, because we didn't want those creepy people looking into our living room at night. I walked up to it, and yeah, it was definitely a fist knocking on the glass that I thought about saying, "Who's there?" But I froze, I was too scared. Instead I flicked on the backyard light, and the knocking stopped immediately. I didn't even want to peek out the window or door. I left the light on, and went back upstairs to tell Sarah about the creepy knocking. I told her I'd chased whoever it was away. I exaggerated a bit because I didn't want to sound like a coward, and I didn't want her to worry. We both figured it had something to do with that house. Nothing's happened since, but I'll have to update as winter goes on. It's been 2 weeks, and we haven't seen those people at the window since. But last night we heard yelling and screaming coming from that house. I had to open our window to be sure, and it was clear, muffled yells coming from over there. The fact that we could hear it through 2 sets of closed windows shows how loud it was. Then, out of nowhere, it just stopped and everything went quiet. We almost called the police but ended up not doing it. I'll update again if anything else happens, but we're really getting creeped out here now.